Hello, Rufus.
Hello, Jeff.
Rufus Gifford has a bachelor's of what? From Brown University.
Bachelor of Arts.
Bachelor of Arts from Brown University. He's a former Hollywood producer. Did such movies as Daddy Daycare and Dr. Dolittle 2.
And it's not as celebrated a chapter of my life, but yes, fair enough.
I really enjoyed Daddy Daycare. My wife and I watched it with our daughter, and it was pretty good.
Well, I have to say that one thing that if I've ever gotten compliments about my entertainment career, that chapter of my life, it's from parents who've said that it's given them many hours of peaceful weekends.
It's a good movie. I like it.
It's okay. It's okay.
No, I'll give you credit. He was the finance director for the Democratic National Committee and raised over $1 billion. He is responsible for that. He was also the star of I Am the Ambassador on Netflix. Is that a star? Or the featured individual?
I would say that.
Okay.
Yeah, I guess.
I haven't seen that.
Subject.
Yes, the subject of. I guess it's a documentary. I wouldn't to be polite, call it a documentary, not a reality show.
Thank
right?
you.
Okay.
Yes.
A documentary on Netflix. I Am the Ambassador. I'll have to check it out. Currently, he is a Democratic candidate for United States Congress in Massachusetts 3rd District. Rufus, welcome to the Lincoln Review podcast.
Thanks for having me. Delighted to be here.
First up, before we get into policy deep dives, I'd like to know a couple things. I mean, give me the 30-second elevator speech of why you're running.
Sure. Yeah. So I worked for President Obama for 10 years. The last 4, I was overseas as the U.S. ambassador to Denmark. I think that, like so many other people, the morning Donald Trump was elected, it truly, with so much of what we had fought for over the course of the 10 years of the Obama administration on the line, for me, even though I was frankly pretty exhausted after 10 years working for the president, I realized I had to come home, step up my level of service. So, I worked at the top levels of politics, worked at the top levels of government, served overseas, have a foreign policy perspective. And for me, this is nothing short of our democracy. There's a lot at stake, and our democracy is at risk right now.
All right. Leading into that, are you in favor of impeaching Donald Trump?
It's a question in a vacuum. There have to be high crime.
As of right now.
As
of recording of this episode,
what's the high crime and misdemeanor? I mean, that's the question.
Right.
We need evidence. And that what I would like to see happen is the Mueller investigation fully play itself out with him getting all the resources that he needs. We'll see what he presents, and of course, if he comes up with a compelling case, then certainly I'll hear it. I am no fan of Donald Trump. We all know that, but this is what I tell people in the street constantly: is let's stop talking about impeachment. Let's stop talking about the 25th Amendment. There are 535 people who have control over whether that could happen.
This is a good point. Yeah. I think what we're seeing right now, I've been a fierce critic of the president.
Sure.
There's a whole nother discussion of where Republicans lie in supporting or not supporting the president.
Sure.
I support him when I think he's right, and I don't when I think he's wrong. But you bring up a good point. How do you reconcile that with a primary? There's about 50 people in this primary. How do you reconcile hardcore progressives or the hard left in the Democratic Party in the primary who want to go for impeachment? Are you comfortable saying, no, we have to actually the answer you just gave?
I am 100%. I mean, this is what I think is fundamentally at risk in our society right now is this concept of trust. We have got to I believe in our systems. I believe in our institutions, unlike Donald Trump, as far as I'm concerned. And we need to let this process play itself out. But again, I hope to be one of the 535 people in the country that gets to decide whether or not Donald Trump is impeached, assuming there is a high crime or misdemeanor presented.
Right.
That being said, if I go to I'm going to a Democratic town committee in Acton in an hour or so, what do I tell them? What we got to focus on is our elections. We got to focus on participation. All we have control over as individual citizens is electing the right kind of candidates right now. So that's what I tell people to focus on.
Well, then you mentioned,
yeah,
I think is an important part of this is that our institutions have held, and they are holding, which is one thing. I think there was a bit of hysteria after Donald Trump was elected and after his inauguration about the forthcoming fascist dictatorship that we were about to undergo. But I think what we're seeing slowly play out through Congress's power, through the power of the judiciary, is that it does keep the executive in check. So it's comforting to hear that you want to at least restore the institutions or bolster them in the sense, and I think they're doing their job to a large extent.
Well, I would make this argument about our institutions. I don't disagree with you that I think for the most part they are holding up, but they are being tested in a major way. When the reporting comes out that Donald Trump attempted or wanted to or asked Don McGahn at least to fire Bob Mueller in June, that is a threat to our democracy. That is what dictators do. Thankfully, it seems like to your point, that the systems, the institutions have held up, but I'm worried about them. This is what I want, whether it's a blue wave or a purple wave. I'm hoping it's a blue wave that comes out in this election in November. I want it to be the opposite of the Tea Party movement. I want it to be the opposite of the drain the swamp. Why? Because I want to
bigger government, bigger swamp.
No, it's not so much about that. It's about electing people who actually believe in the Constitution, electing people who actually believe in this stuff.
let me preface that. So
and want to celebrate it and not tear it down.
Okay.
What we've been electing recently are people who want to tear it down. Let's elect people who want to build it back up.
Then either you're implying or overtly saying that the Tea Party movement was not a part about reducing government intervention in our lives or return back to constitutional principles. Because what's your interpretation of it? Because we might have slightly different interpretations of what returning to constitutional principles.
Well, no,
mean.
I think that unfortunately, I think what the result of the Tea Party movement was a tearing down of institutions.
How so?
Well, look at sequester. It's a great example of what I think was bad governing. That's my belief. It's my belief, and that's tearing down a system and actually, and in many ways, taking vital resources away from things as fundamental as our military to make a political point, and that is not building up an institution.
No, I'd have to push back on that in the sense of sequestration. While I do agree, maybe it was a ham-handed way to move things forward, it did actually keep spending that was exploding, and my party is fully responsible for that now in 2018, the spending that's taken place. But back then, you're talking about stimulus spending, bailouts, things like that. We're pushing annual deficits over $1 trillion. That was the pushback. That was how they could make it happen in, again, a ham-handed kind of way.
Well, but I think if you go back in history, when you look at what happened with sequester, essentially the Republicans put forward this bill in a way that no one ever dreamed that it would pass, that it was so politically toxic that we never dreamed it would pass. And then what happened is the far right took hold of Congress and passed it anyway. And that is, to me, that is not good governing.
Well, can I ask a question? Was sequestration signed into law?
Well, it passed.
And was it signed into law? Somebody had to sign it into law. Look, my point being is like when you have, and I, as an outsider to the Democratic Party, I look at things like President Clinton did in the '90s compared to President Obama from 2008 on. There was definitely more of a deal-making mentality in the '90s with Clinton, for better, for worse, whatever it was. But sequestration is something that I think was valuable. Maybe it was not how we want things to operate all the time, and it has eroded our political discourse from there. But it was necessary. It was necessary because there was spending taking place that was at an absurd rate. So I mean, I'll let you get the last word on that.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and I appreciate the perspective here. I fundamentally disagree. As a federal government employee, witnessing sequester, I mean, you saw cuts happening in places that were just felt politically motivated and did not have the country's best interest in mind. That is my perspective.
Okay. We can get into those cuts in a second.
Sure.
As far as policy, I have to knock you a little bit. I checked your website, and I've spoken with your team on this, looking for issues that we could discuss. There aren't any issues on your website.
Yeah, that's just a matter of time. Truthfully, I am the most opinionated person you'll ever meet. There's without a doubt, hopefully, in the very, very near future, we'll have some real issues on the website.
All right. So
right now it's just a landing page and a donate button, but it's just give
me a sneak peek. What are you running on? What are the issues you're running on?
Well, so there's a few. So do you want to talk big picture or do you want to talk policy?
You start with stuff.
Okay. So big picture. So I think that, and we touched on this a little bit. I think this political wave that we are hopefully going to see in 2018 will do something more fundamental than just implement policy, and that will be
define fundamental. I'm getting shades of your former boss from 2000 about fundamentally changing America, which I'm going to take issue with.
An enormous compliment.
All right, what fundamentally needs to be changed?
Trust is broken, and trust is broken right now between the public and our institutions. Congress polls at an all-time low. You go knock doors in District 3 in Massachusetts, people are not voting. Why? Because they don't believe their politicians are working for them. We have got to make a shift there. We have got to, and I know, look, I'm not Pollyanna-ish about this. I know that I'm one of 435 if I'm lucky enough to be elected to this seat. That being said, I hope this next generation of politicians gets out there, gets out from behind their desks, listens to constituents. My party as well, by the way. I think we've done an absolutely terrible job listening to constituents historically. I think it's one of the reasons why we lost in 2016. We lost touch with a huge piece of the country. And we've got to build that trust back.
Can I use a term of the left? Is that dog whistling in any direction? I mean, what do you specifically lost touch with? What? Let's unpack it a little bit more.
Yeah, sounds great. So I mean, people ask me all the time. So what do you say to the white working class voter? Right?
Sure.
That's what you get in any, whether that's we could be in any piece of this district, and this district's incredibly diverse. But I would get that question almost everywhere you go. And the first thing I say is, you say nothing. One of the reasons why we've been losing for years in this part of the country is because we've been talking a lot and not listening. And for Democrats not to fundamentally understand what's happening in coal country doesn't allow us to respond. I don't believe we've done a good enough job understanding what's happening. And I think it's a terrible job to reopen the coal mines. I think a terrible idea to reopen the coal mines. But unless you understand what's going on in that part of the country, which I think especially our presidential candidate in the last election,
you think it's a lack of understanding? Really?
I do.
See, I have to push back on you.
Sure, please.
I think it's not a lack of understanding. I think it's an intentional rejection of people who maybe don't fit the comportment of what the modern Democratic Party is today. I mean, those were voters from a generation ago, or not even a generation ago, that were solidly Democrats. Reliable Democrats, and they flipped, and they flipped over the course of the past 5 to 10 years. I don't necessarily
think it's earlier than that. I mean, look at West Virginia.
Fair enough. Yeah. I mean, it might be earlier than that. But the idea that it comes from a lack of understanding, it probably rings hollow, because I think there's in our culture today, talking about left-right divide. The left certainly drives home the idea over and over again that those white working class voters or those blue collar voters are looked down upon. Their noses are,
Well, that's the conventional wisdom, but I would say that's what the Republicans have been pushing. I don't believe that that's true on the part of Democrats at all, but I don't believe we've done a good enough job actually understand. I mean, there are individual Democrats that have done a great job at this, that do very, very well.
Which ones?
Well, look, I mean, we still elect a lot of very, very popular Democrats in the coal belt, right, in the Rust Belt.
There's Joe Manchin, but I mean,
Sherrod Brown in Ohio.
Okay.
I mean, these are people. I worked for Sherrod Brown. A lot of people have said that he's supporting my campaign. So it's all
right. So that's a good point. So some more. I'll say there are. I've met a fair amount of centrist Democrats. Just in my day-to-day life and through politics. Is that something? is that a picture that we could paint about you politically, your alignment more along the Sherrod Brown, Joe Manchin? Yeah,
truthfully,
tell me more.
I would not put myself in that box. I mean, I'm in Massachusetts. I would put myself more in line, and you'll love this, but I'm much more. I would align myself with more a Kennedy model or an Obama model.
Okay,
frankly.
All right. Cosmopolitan progressive. Right?
You use the word cosmopolitan. I don't know that anyone has ever really called me cosmopolitan before.
You had your own show on Netflix.
Come on. We got to talk about that then, because that is like a crazy story.
Well, I only have one question. The only one thing that matters to me about Denmark is Caroline Wozniacki, because I'm a big tennis fan. So did you get to meet her?
I actually have played tennis with Caroline Wozniacki.
All right. I'm already very, very jealous. All right. So, I mean, you talk about reaching out to blue-collar workers,
sure,
or understanding and listening, but
what's listening? It's about building trust.
Right.
So listening is part of building trust to me.
Why do you think the trust has been eroded? I know I have my opinions over the course of the past 10 to 20 years. And it's been a long time coming.
Sure.
It's been more than 20 years.
It has, absolutely.
But why has that trust been eroded, and what specifically, and I'm going to challenge you on this, what specifically are you going to do or push to gain back that trust?
Yeah, so it's the first, so there's two pieces to, should I take, which part do you want me to take first? Why it happened? So I do think it's a long time coming.
Why do you think it
So
happened?
I think the why it happened, this has been happening for years and years and years, but I think a lot of it is directly connected to the financial crisis and the response, frankly, of both parties to the financial crisis. Which continues now, which is the sense that, taking away the last week or two, the stock market continues to increase. That's great. I'm sure you're happy about that. I'm happy about that. But we all know. I mean, look, I was at a homeless shelter in Haverhill just a couple of weeks back, and they were giving me stats that would just make your blood boil. That homelessness in Massachusetts has doubled since 2008. With the average age of a homeless kid, average age of a homeless person in Massachusetts, 8 years old. That's hardly full recovery, and and everyone can be blamed for that. Democrats, Republicans. Obviously, we've had Democrats and Republicans in the state house in Massachusetts during that time. We've had Democrats and Republicans in the White House in Washington during that time. So obviously something's not working. That even though, look, during the Obama administration, I touted month after month after month after month of job creation, something that is great, right? We every single time, and I will be the first to say that my party should celebrate when new jobs are created, right? 2017 was the worst year for job creation since 2010.
Well, I'll give President Obama. I do give him credit on certain aspects where I agree with him.
Sure.
Job creation and economic improvement is always a good thing, but there are things there are regulations, there are laws that are on the books that prevent a throwback to what we saw a generation ago of robust growth.
Dodd-Frank?
Off the top of, we can get to Dodd-Frank in a second. I know a lot about Dodd-Frank. Yeah, I mean, sure. Remember, I ran for Congress about 6 years ago, so I know my Dodd-Frank.
I know, of course you do. You may know it better.
But no, I was more thinking to things like the ACA, Affordable Care Act, which had a perverse disincentive to cap employees at 39.5 hours to keep them from becoming full-time for health benefits. And we can get into healthcare in a second. But
sure.
the point being is that I think we had the lack of robust growth that was possible for any American economy during President Obama's term because of some of these regulations. And I think the idea of Trump for the stock market when he got elected was that he would get rid of some of the more onerous ones that was preventing the economy from growing as it probably is right now. It's we're going to have actually some good growth numbers coming up. Do I attribute that directly to Donald Trump? No.
Well, I don't disagree with that
I think there's and I've talked with very well-respected Republicans that Trump has surrounded himself with a good foreign policy team, but
I definitely disagree with that.
Okay, maybe we'll leave that for the end.
Sure.
But the point being is, though, it's pretty boilerplate Republican federal agenda being put forth
economically.
Economically down in D.C. So
yeah, I don't disagree with that either.
when we talk
which is
about
very different from how he campaigned, by the way.
Agreed. I'm actually more pleasantly surprised that he has listened to the people that surround him. But to back to the original point of the lack of growth that has not affected everybody as equal distribution or a more equitable distribution around the country. I think that some of that is due to the past 8 years of the infrastructure politically we've had in place, those regulations. What are you putting forward in your congressional campaign that is going to help those individuals directly?
Right. Well, so first of all, you got to, look, we'll disagree on this, but you got to raise the minimum wage. That is what I believe. I actually think we need a larger kind of, you don't want to use the term New Deal, but I think my party's got to stand for something that's big and bold.
You know why you don't want to use the term New Deal? Because the New Deal, it has a bad reputation at this point.
That I could not disagree with more.
Okay.
The New Deal has a phenomenal reputation. In fact, it probably defined
among Democrats.
Well, it's what defined the United States for a generation. I would argue that the New Deal, together with the Marshall Plan, that is what defined the United States as a great global leader. That is what I believe. And
so, what would you increase? Regardless of the naming convention that you put on your New Deal, what are you talking about?
Well, I think we got to put forward an agenda where people believe that government has their back once again.
Okay, so you mentioned the minimum wage.
Yeah, minimum wage. That's very basic. I think that, frankly, everybody who's running for this seat in this primary will support that. the majority of.
And what's the number you have in mind?
Well,
for wage?
Look, it's right now federal minimum wage 15, so it's but I think locally, of
what
course
about
we got to
25.
If you are good, it's true.
I'm
but
asking you a leading question.
We have to acknowledge that a $25 minimum wage in a more rural part of the country does not make sense, right? Whereas it might make sense.
You're making a law. Well, this is we can get it. I think this brings up some important parts of federalism in our society.
Yeah.
That's something that I think that too many Democrats have rediscovered with President Trump, the idea of federalism. But yes. If you say $15 and it sounds nice on a campaign slogan or in a talking point,
right?
But when you get down to it, why not 17? Why not 21? Why not 30? And I say these as exaggerated examples to prove a point that the cost of living in certain parts of the country is not New York City.
Right.
If people around the New York City area, but you're artificially raising that cost of labor. There are impacts to that.
Of course there are. This is the role to me.
Trade-offs.
This of course there are. But this is the role of the federal government. You have to create a threat. You have to create a basement, right? You have to. This is about governing based on it's economics for sure, but it's also about values. So what do we stand for? So what is the floor? What is the lowest it could be? Now, I would be the last person to tell you what the lowest it should be. Excuse me, but I'm the last person who's going to tell you that's. Do you think $15 minimum wage is livable in New York? Of course not. New York City.
All right. First of all, but we need to clarify these. This is why I'm glad I have this podcast. One, because we're having a very interesting conversation to me, and hopefully policy wonks out there. And you're not going to get this at any TV interview or radio interview.
Yeah.
Because one, the host isn't necessarily going to challenge you on these things, and two, we don't have time to unpack it as we should.
Yeah.
But I think there's faulty logic in what you're saying, and I'm not picking on you because of it, but the idea that you're supposed to live on the minimum wage, which less than 1% of workers actually earn the minimum wage, is not necessarily what the minimum wage was designed to do. And in certain aspects, when you have minimum wage, it's for entry-level work. Mm-hmm. It's entry-level work. And you're seeing the effects of cities that have implemented a $15 minimum wage, and there are trade-offs. I'm not saying you can't make an across-the-board sweeping law that raises everybody to 15, but what are the trade-offs? There are dramatic and negative trade-offs to doing that. But you can pat yourself on the back and say you helped the cost of living.
I see. This is where I look. First of all,
if you make it to the United States Congress, people like me are going to be telling people like people like you the points that I'm making.
Sure.
Tell me how. When a small business owner, and those who are the people they employ, tell me how you get past that point of it being a good trade-off.
Well, look, this is the truth. We do know that corporations are making profits that are significant right now, and in many cases record profits. This tax bill, of course, is very, very good for business.
Wait, I'll mark that at minute 27 or 25.
No, it's true. I mean, is it not?
No, I agree.
I will tell you, look, I would have advocated for a corporate tax cut. I wouldn't have advocated for 21%, but I would have advocated for a corporate tax cut.
Actually, I remember when I started doing television way back in 2012, 2013, President Obama was actually in favor of reducing the corporate tax rate to around 20 to 25.
Yeah, I lived and worked in Europe for 4 years, and I mean, you saw
Ireland. You see the corporate rates are much lower.
Exactly.
All right, well, I'm happy to see that, there's some sense.
But that's my party supports that, and it has for
they would have. No, there's a hashtag from the Massachusetts delegation calling it the tax scam or some ridiculous.
That's the 21%. Let's be clear. I think if the Republicans had stuck to 25%, you would not have had that. Truthfully, I think you would have had.
You think the outrage is over 4%? Really?
I do. I mean, that's significant. And in fact, you talk to most economists, and they did not believe that the additional 4% was necessary.
Okay.
Yeah. That's at least who I talk to.
So we've covered the minimum wage and how it will be a wonderful panacea to improving the lives of the working class. I wholeheartedly disagree.
I know. I think that's fair. So this is where I think where we go. Where sort of this other contracts that we go to at the party, and that is healthcare. I mean, I know this is going to drive you crazy, but it's true. I actually
your old boss drove me crazy enough. I'm ready. I'm ready for whatever you got.
I actually think that we are at a time in our country's history that we have proven that that this kind of healthcare, that an overly privatized healthcare,
time out. You think this is overly privatized?
Compare it to any other country in the West.
Singapore. Oh, in the West, Singapore. Yeah. Singapore is a good example. France is a hybrid model.
You know that our system is considerably more privatized than any other country. That's any one of our neighboring countries, right?
Wait, you mean?
I mean, including Western Europe.
More privatized, relatively, sure it is, but not. It's heavily regulated. The idea that it's privatized.
Where are healthcare costs the highest in the world? And you don't think that has anything to do with the privatization of healthcare?
No, I think it has the quality of our healthcare. I think the privatization that we have in the United States and the healthcare costs that are related to it help subsidize the innovation that takes place around the globe in medical technology, in disease curing, in cancer rates going down. I think we are the genesis of a lot of innovation that takes place.
I totally agree with that.
The Europeans are the beneficiaries of, and they don't have. And plus, first of all, we'll get to cost in a second.
Sure.
Because cost is really important, because we talk about cost, but we don't really talk about cost. We have expensive healthcare.
We do.
Because it's worth it. Now, we pay for it more directly than the Europeans do, more directly than the Canadians do, and that by paying for it more directly, we actually get more control over our healthcare decisions. Now, the part where we get less control, is part of the government regulations over the privatization. So healthcare. What are you putting forward? Are you putting forward a Medicare for all, single payer?
I would support
synonymous to me.
Yeah, of course, fair enough. The truth of the matter is, I think we need to get to a place in our country where we have universal health care. Do you think that's possible?
Define
single payer, Medicare for all, whatever you want to call it.
Define universal health care.
Some sort of single payer type system.
You want a single payer system?
Yes. Okay. Do I think that it is possible federally right now? No, I don't. And again, this is after having lived.
Are the evil Republicans preventing it, or why not?
I'll talk ideologically right now. Okay, so having spent the last 4 years in Europe, understanding that in a place like Denmark, of course, they've had universal health care, which works very, very well. And you talk to all of the Republican craziness about long waits and all of that. It just doesn't exist to the extent that people say it does. It just doesn't. I was talking to a guy.
I'll tell you what's great about this is I can put in show notes.
That's cool.
Of long wait times.
And I can tell you real stories from people. Like I was talking to a guy actually just the other night in Boston who had a bike accident in Denmark. and had to have surgery. Got surgery on the spot, walked out, didn't even get a bill. I mean, that is just the system, and it works.
Okay. But what happens if you have a serious disease, though? The dynamic shifts quite a bit, no?
It doesn't necessarily. First of all, they do have an option for private health care if you want to pay for it. So there is an option. That being said, if you have a serious disease, of course, I mean, if it's elective surgery, if you're going to have knee replacement, it might take a little bit longer, for sure, unless you want to pay more.
Knee replacement is elective surgery. As someone who has two knee surgeries, you kind of need your knees to walk. Well, it's not elective.
Of course it is. I mean, compare that to a heart attack, heart surgery, or cancer surgery. Of course, I mean, it ranks differently.
But why should a government institution, whether it's in Europe or whether it's in America, even be anywhere near that decision for somebody's personal health?
I think
you're inserting the government in that situation.
No, I think it's a fair assessment to make. Who should if you need heart surgery versus cancer, if you need heart surgery or cancer surgery versus knee replacement, who should go to the front of the line? Cancer.
Yeah, but in America there's no line. You just have to pay. There's a difference. There's a line. There's a line for.
Just so we're clear, I mean, occasionally you will certainly have to wait for knee replacement surgery in the United States.
Not nearly as long as you would if you were in the UK under the National Health System.
But this is the idea. So I mean.
But why? We're talking about why. Is it generally to shift the cost burden from those who have more of the financial means to that somebody who is poor or working class, where they don't have to pay as much? Is that the end goal? Because
the end goal is values. The end goal is, who are you as a country? Where are you as a democracy? Is healthcare a right or a privilege? And I think it's fundamentally about that.
No, I think that's a false choice, though. It's not a right or a privilege. I mean, when we talk about it, a right would imply that it's guaranteed to you no matter what. Right. It's a good or service. Yeah. Now, the government has to provide that good or service to you no matter what. Right. And with a population large as ours, there's rationing will be unavoidable, as it is in most European countries that have a single-payer system.
Rationing of
healthcare.
Describe that. Describe. Sure. What do you mean by rationing? Seriously,
I mean delays in necessary surgeries or medical procedures.
Where do you think more people die waiting for treatment? In Europe or the United States? That's truth of the access to healthcare.
There's a reason why people who live in single-payer systems like Canada come to the United States when they get serious
if they
diseases.
Can afford it. I mean, that's the problem.
Yes, of course. But that's. I mean, so they're skirting around it, and the lower classes.
That's incredibly sort of. So if you can, I don't disagree with you. We live in the city with the best hospitals. We live in the state with the best hospitals in the world. People from all over the world will go to MGH or Brigham and Women's, whatever.
Absolutely.
And if they can afford it, and healthcare should not be a class-based system. It shouldn't. It should be a fundamental right of every single person in a first-world democracy like ours.
You should have the right to access it. And we talk practically. You'd say it's a right till you're blue in the face and the day is long, but that doesn't make it any more accessible and lower the cost of it. I mean, and I want to get back to the cost. We started out on the cost of it and how that would transfer down. I mean, we have states right now that have put forward single-payer legislation in Vermont, in California, and these things never get off the ground for the primary reason is it will double the budget. Not double the healthcare budget, double the entire budget, okay? So in order to implement a single-payer system where the government takes complete control over all of our healthcare decisions, you have to raise an amazing amount of taxes, and that's what's not talked about. And I'll knock your party a little bit, because across the board, those in favor of single payer never talk about how to pay for it. In Western European countries, the tax rate is well over 50% in most of the Nordic countries. This is huge. So we pay very low taxes, but healthcare is expensive, as I alluded to earlier, and we pay directly for it. So are you prepared to go tell the voters of the 3rd District, when you go to D.C., how much more they're willing to pay in taxes. But, it's a trade-off. You're going to trade this. You're going to trade your insurance bureaucracy and your local medical decisions for this great federal bureaucracy that I promise will be terrific.
Well, this, but this is remember what I started saying this. I said this should be an aspirational goal federally, and I don't believe it's possible. And where I started talking about Scandinavia, I don't believe it's possible in the short term. To your point, Scandinavians trust government, and they're very happy to invest in government in order to pay for these services. They are happy to do it. Same is true throughout Europe. Trump tweeted the other day about the federal healthcare system in the UK. It's incredibly popular. If you poll the entire country, incredibly popular. Same is true in virtually every single country in Europe that has it. And it's true. Not that it can't be improved, but it's very popular. But they are willing to invest in it. Now, Americans are not in the same way federally. So our system is based on an inherent distrust of government. In Denmark,
as it should be, a healthy distrust.
But every other Western democracy is not. Every other Western democracy actually trusts government a lot more than the United States does. And I think in Massachusetts, we also trust government a lot more than, say, the folks in Wyoming might. They are far more libertarian, and we are far more liberal when it comes to the role of government in society. This is my point. My point here is, if we're talking about single payer, we have got to, if we're going to do it, and if my party wants to do this, which I think we should, we got to start it. So we got to start at the state level. You can't, to your point.
This is true. Why not let?
But you can't take a country like Denmark with 5.7 million people, like Bernie says, and Bernie says we should emulate Denmark. Now that's fine. But 5.7 million people, that's relatively homogeneous and quite wealthy. You can't just plop that on top of the United States of America overnight and make it work. But demographically, what's actually relatively similar to a state like to a country like Denmark, a state like Massachusetts. So it's do I think that we should try to push it forward in a state like Massachusetts, a state that's led on issue after issue from everything from Romney Care to gay marriage? I think we should.
But Bernie's home state, rejected single payer. I mean, they couldn't get it passed. I don't know enough Bernie's
about Vermont.
But it's a counter argument to what you're going to hear if you win the primary and there's debates about it.
I appreciate it. I just think it's don't people want political leadership right now? Like, don't people want vision for something? I mean, what is the
it depends. I think it depends what the vision is.
What's the Republican vision for healthcare? I fundamentally don't understand it. There's nothing other than repealing Obamacare, which they keep failing.
For practical purposes, I think you'd get a fair amount of Republicans that would want to emulate more of a Singapore model. Mm-hmm. Okay, more of a model where people who are more well off or make more money are allowed to save more of their money and pay directly, health savings accounts, things like that. You have a safety net for the poor. I think a state safety net across 50 separate safety nets that take care of the poor, that take care of our kids, all the stuff we had before the Affordable Care Act. But you also have to.
I can't speak to the Singapore model, honestly.
I'm just putting an example for the audience at home. Wait, check it out, okay? Because you don't have a single payer situation. But you have private insurance, which here's the idea. Insurance.
Use the example, sort of what we had before the Affordable Care Act.
I would say pull it back from the Affordable Care Act. Here's Jeff Simone's, I won't say libertarian, but conservative federalist approach to healthcare, and that is returning insurance to actual insurance. Okay, because right now insurance is just this massive bureaucracy that you pay through everything. Everything goes through insurance now. Supplanting that bureaucracy with the federal bureaucracy, I don't see how that could be more efficient than the private market.
But how do you feel about Medicare?
Medicare is an institution that I think hides a lot of the costs, and that Democrat. But how do I feel about it?
But I'm not saying. But it's a good program. It's one of the most popular programs in the country.
It's popular because the true costs of Medicare aren't seen. Okay,
I'm not saying that we can't cut
60 cents on the dollar for reimbursements.
But I think it's popular.
It's popular because the people who benefit from it
works.
Well, we define work differently.
Okay,
you and I, as younger than retired age people, subsidize Medicare.
Absolutely.
heavily, not directly through our tax dollars, but indirectly through our healthcare spending and our insurance premiums. Medicare elevates the cost for those who are not on Medicare medical providers have to inflate their prices and their costs.
But the point is that I'm not saying that there's not Medicare waste or Medicare fraud. We all know that there is. I am a believer that any government program should be looked at over the years and cleaned up if need be, and you make slight changes here and there. I would never not say that. But fundamentally, Medicare is a critical. It's not only popular, but it's also effective. One of the most popular and effective government programs in the history of the United States. And I think but that is when you talk about a single payer model and you criticize it, that is the model that we're talking about. I mean, government, the Republicans are famous for saying, get your government hands off my Medicare. Well, that's just the most ironic thing in the world, of course.
No, I'll wrap up. We went on long in healthcare. I'll say, but Medicare, the costs of it are hidden because the reimbursement rates are dramatically low of what the actual cost is, and of course it's popular because you don't have to worry about it. It's just there, and it's a fully funded plan that isn't difficult to navigate, and that our seniors can do it. So if you poll seniors, of course they love Medicare because they've already paid their taxes on it. They don't have to pay for it now. They don't see the real cost of what their services that they're being provided. You roll that out to everybody else and slap on a massive tax rate to fund this Medicare for all, you're going to see a lot less popular opinions on that. Well. That's healthcare.
Okay.
We've talked.
Well, we will agree to disagree on it, though. I appreciate the conversation very much, actually.
Culturally,
yes,
how do you feel about what's going on in college campuses with protests and I'd say, a lot of the cliched social justice warriors talking about protesting people coming to their campus, just run-of-the-mill conservative speakers and saying that.
Who are you defining as a run-of-the-mill conservative speaker?
In ideology, people like Ben Shapiro.
I think Ben Shapiro has every right to speak on a college campus, and I have every right to protest him. So you don't think? Do you
believe in concepts like hate speech being outlawed or anything?
Well, it depends on who it is. I mean,
I'm talking outlawed.
Well, it depends on what is hate speech. I mean,
define it for me.
Well, if it's incendiary to the point that it actually it's encouraging oppression or violence, absolutely. I mean, I think that it's
who defines encouraging?
Well, it's subjective, right?
It is.
Yeah. So it has to be. Look, I mean,
so you can't make a law.
You're talking to
this
a
is the First Amendment. This is First Amendment stuff.
I actually totally agree with you. But you're talking to a Brown University grad who, we had protests on campus all the time. I don't remember a conservative speaker ever not showing up because of it. Maybe they did. I don't remember it. It gets a lot of attention at Berkeley these days.
Now they get uninvited.
I think Republicans are pushing the message.
Well, yeah, it's true. But I mean, look, there are groups like Antifa, and there are organized groups on these campuses saying, "Don't come here. We don't want your hate speech." Yeah. When they know nothing about the speaker. Well, so I mean, the point being, but you alluded to something
between Ben Shapiro and David Duke.
Of course.
I don't think David Duke has any place on a college campus.
No, he's despicable.
Yeah.
No, these are despicable people that genuinely don't need to be heard. David Dukes, the Richard Spencers, obviously.
Guys,
but there is a conflation going on, I think, on college campuses, and we get into the college graduates that are coming out of these institutions are moving forward with their lives with the idea that hate speech is something that should be controlled. And I'm going to allow you a chance to clarify what you're talking about there. I mean, because I'm a firm believer in the First Amendment. Right. I don't think there is necessarily the concept of hate speech, because then you have to define hate speech, and as you alluded to earlier, who defines it? It's subjective. Yeah. One person's hate speech is another one person's right to free speech.
Sure.
That's why the First Amendment is so important. So I mean,
I agree.
Look,
I'm a
we're talking
massive
about
First Amendment
in legal capacity. In legal capacity.
Yeah, look, I mean, first of all, if a private institution, meaning a private university, can decide who gets to speak on their campus, I mean, that's and if students want to protest it, that's just as much their right as well. And look, that's just democracy.
No, true. I agree.
And I think that's a good thing. But we have to look. I mean, if there is someone that I guess it's this. We can't turn a blind eye and lean on the First Amendment when people are actually spewing hate. And again,
what's your resolution
to
what's your resolution to that?
I think society's got to define it. Meaning, and I say this. I mean, I think that they essentially have to be rejected by society because the First Amendment does protect their ability to do it.
Correct. How would you reject it?
I would do myself personally or legislatively. Myself personally,
either.
If someone like David Duke or Richard Spencer was coming to speak to some sort of whether it's a university or something that I had a part of, I'd protest like hell. And
that's a good answer. I like that answer because the answer for me is more speech. Is counter
Fair
speech.
enough. No, I actually think that's totally valid.
Because I'm glad you're putting that forward, because I think it's important that one thing we can agree as Democrats and Republicans is that the First Amendment is an absolute right, and that we don't shut down speech. The answer to speech you don't like is more speech.
I agree with that.
And talking through it informs and exposing, putting light on the vile aspects of free speech, but that enlightens the conversation, and that the idea that people get offended, and that if you're offended by speech, you should have to shut it down. I mean, you're seeing this does happen in the UK. It's happening in Canada. These are things that I think that are uniquely American that we need. It is. We can get into that.
Okay. I just don't know the examples, but I mean, some of the,
maybe if you win the primary, we'll have another podcast and get into that. Okay, so no, good. I'm glad you. Those are good answers.
I think that's totally. I think that's. I 100% feel that way.
Okay.
People ask me all the time, how do you fight fake news? You speak the truth louder.
Okay.
And that's what I believe as far as hate speech is concerned too.
All right, good answers. What about sanctuary cities? What's your? This is it's something that's popping up more and more in Massachusetts. Run the gamut on what your opinion of sanctuary cities are, and maybe immigration as a whole.
Okay,
and we'll get into that.
This is something I do hope we can agree on, because I imagine you're a disciple of someone like Reagan, who not only, I'm sure you've watched the Republican primary debate in 1980 between H.W. Bush and Reagan.
Yep.
You'd think they were lefty Democrats by 2018 standards on immigration. The United States is and should continue to be a shining beacon of hope for oppressed people around the world. It's what we have always been and what we should continue to be. And to frankly see the Republican Party take a page from European xenophobic and hyper-nationalist politics.
I'm not too thrilled with that either.
I think it's it's hilarious. It's just the naivete associated with someone like Donald Trump saying that we don't want immigrants from Haiti and Nigeria, we want them from Norway. Well, the truth.
No, I'll say it here. I said it on Twitter. It's just a flat out racist presumption, and it is terrible to that. But there are flaws and problems with our current immigration laws and policies. So
we have got to be rules based.
But hang on, there is this idea on the, I'd say the European socialists left of this concept of open borders. It's tough to, we're running out of time here. We got about 10 or 15 minutes left.
Right?
Yeah,
I could do this longer.
Yeah, well, no, this is why these podcasts are good.
Yeah.
No, but there is this idea of open borders.
Yeah. I lived in Europe during the Syrian crisis. So
so you saw the flotillas coming across the Mediterranean.
Not only that, I shook my head at it every day. As the United States, I was very proud to represent the United States during this chapter, because I could talk about American progressive immigration policy. That, whether it was in a Republican administration or a Democratic administration, where we figured this out. American immigration policy is not perfect. It's not, and it has never been. But we are still the best example of successful immigration policy in the world. The Europeans are not. And there's lots of reasons why, and we probably don't have time to go into it. But it was wrong that they could not protect their external border. So essentially what was happening was chaos. There were no rules. there was just a flooding of people coming into a continent, and you understand the rise of far right populism when there doesn't seem to be any rules. And not that I support it, I don't support it. In fact, I condemn it aggressively. But it was the responsibility of the Europeans to protect their external border.
Do you think that had any? The lack of protection had anything to do with more of the gravity moving towards the European Union rather than individual countries setting their own immigration policies?
I
mean, again, sort of this loose concept of federalism, but you know,
but they do.
Sovereign nation being able to
because they do
I think they were getting in through Turkey and Turkey being a part of the EU, then you have, you know,
they were getting
free access
from Turkey. But each individual country did set their own immigration standards. The problem is that they do have open borders, so they could, if you were a far right dictator in a place, dictator is too strong a word, admittedly. But
I don't know that there's any far right dictators in Europe right now.
Viktor Orban in Hungary has consolidated power in a way that we should all be afraid of. But regardless, you could actually send those guys in Hungary could decide to throw a whole bunch of refugees into Germany, because Germany was, of course, much more welcoming. I was living and working in a country that was sandwiched between two very progressive countries on immigration. Denmark was considerably less so. Germany was very progressive. Sweden was very progressive. So the people who ending up in Denmark, most of them were on their way to Sweden. But then the problem again was chaos. And this goes back to what we need to fix inside the American immigration system. You have millions and millions of undocumented people in the United States. We as a country, and this is not a partisan thing, need to figure out what to do with them. And I believe. So what do I believe? Yeah. I believe that we absolutely have to create a pathway to citizenship, and that is what I believe. And I believe that is fundamentally American.
I think you're going to have. We'll maybe have time for one more question.
Sure.
But I think you're going to have trouble with that because there are, oddly enough, President Trump has been very open to the idea of the Dreamers and DACA recipients getting that to the dissatisfaction of his base. I do not include myself in that base. I think the folks who are here, who were brought here as children, the folks who even came here illegally, probably not going back. What do you do with them? I'd be more of a path to legal status than citizenship. That's personal preference. But here's one I wonder. Say you're in the United States Congress right now. President Trump's in the White House. Mm-hmm. That bill comes to the floor. What are you willing to trade off for that? I mean, I think the family-connected migration, where everybody's your cousin rather than your core family, your nuclear family, which is wife and children or spouse and children. Excuse me. That's what who should come over. Not your parents, not your brother, just you, and then other individuals who have talent that we can import into the country. What are you willing to trade off to get the Dreamers and DACA recipients and those who are here illegally a pathway to legal status? And I'll just say you don't have to get into citizenship necessarily, but a pathway to what deal are you willing to make? Because I have a sneaking suspicion. That there are far too many Democrats that behind the scenes with President Obama saying there's no way you can let a Republican president sign that into law and totally flip the narrative when the opportunity to do this when the Democrats control the White House, both houses of Congress, et cetera. So that's just a sneaking suspicion I have. But you're in the United States Congress. Bill comes to. Are you voting yes? What are you willing to trade off? What are you not willing to trade off?
I'll start with the second part because I think that's almost more important. The rest of it is I am not willing to trade off the lottery. I think the lottery, which again is a Ronald Reagan implemented.
That's a Ted
policy.
Kennedy. It's a Ted Kennedy device to get more Irish here. Actually,
I don't know about that.
No, it is. I look it up. No,
really?
you're running in Massachusetts.
I'll believe you on that.
It's a Ted Kennedy law.
Okay, but okay, great point. Great point. Under
It's
what
out of
president
date.
was
It's
that
out of date,
passed? Under what president was that passed?
Oh, sure. It was
Reagan.
bipartisan under Reagan.
Yeah, exactly. It's a great example of how Democrats and Republicans can figure out ways to work together. But the lottery's been an important. I mean, you must have a ton of friends who are foreign, who have had green cards for years and have been waiting for their number.
Some have gotten citizenship. They came here legally. They paid the fees. They did the paperwork. They did everything right.
The lottery is completely legal. That's just the system. I mean, they wait their turn. Yeah. They wait for years at some point, and they work here. They pay taxes. And is
it effective?
I think so, because I think there's something beautifully random. There's something beautifully random about it. There's something that, and it's not that, of course. I mean, look, and I have lots of friends in the tech industry that would love to just make sure that all of the MIT grads end up getting green cards immediately and then citizenship, regardless of where in the world they're from. I don't disagree with that. That'd be great. But I also think it's not what we stand for. We don't just want MIT PhDs. We want other people too.
Why not? I mean, not just PhDs, but philosophically. I mean, the idea that
there's something that's just not who we are. You can't forget what is written on the Statue of Liberty. You can't.
I think we are a country that has become the greatest country in the world because of self-determination, because of the prowess of the individual to come here,
because of the belief that you can be anything, the belief that you're going to create a better life for you and your kids.
One thing I think we'll probably agree on is that whether you're a lottery recipient or you go through other channels to become a legal immigrant here, that does create some buy-in to the society. Some buy-in that they want to become American. They are choosing to become American. They recognize its importance.
Yes.
So I mean, I'll circle it back to the question. Yeah. So what are you willing to? Trade off, and what are you not willing to trade off to get legal status for individuals who came here illegally?
Sure.
For whatever reason.
The other thing, which I just can't imagine ever finding myself in a place to swallow my pride and vote for, is wall funding. I find this to be the most political.
Wall funding. You wouldn't vote for wall funding to get people.
I can't. Again, there's no numbers associated with this. If it's just a couple $1 million, it's one thing. If it's $50 billion or whatever.
Does it make a difference if the appearance on it is border security, not necessarily a wall?
I am 100% in favor of borders. Border security should be part of whatever immigration policy we pass. Okay. Again, this is about law and order. We all know that the issue is not the wall with Mexico. The issue. This is a
visa overstays.
Exactly. Yeah. And I mean, so if you want to really get on the airports. And there's different things that you can do. I believe we're the most technologically advanced country in the world. Maybe, Singapore or something would take issue with that, but we're right up there. The truth of the matter is that's where we should be focusing, not a 1920s kind of solution that is just a political giveaway to a xenophobic Republican base. So I'm just not interested in it. I think that is not who we are, and I don't think it's what we should be.
All right, so you'd keep the lottery, or you wouldn't trade off the lottery for Dreamers or DACA recipients. What about an end to family migration, chain migration?
Family reunification, I think it's an over. I think it's. I understand the point. I mean, if there's something where my side would be willing to compromise on,
so that's something you'd be willing to.
I think it's worth having a conversation about. I don't think it's a problem, frankly. I think the wait time. I mean, this is a legal process. Everyone's working through the system in the legal way, and I don't think it's a real issue. I think it's again more politically charged, but it's not something that is. It's not something where I don't. The other two issues that I mentioned, the lottery and the wall funding, to me, those are very counter to something fundamentally American. And that's why I hate to see them. That's why I can't imagine voting for them.
All right, but we can get a little bit squishy if we call it border security. Is what now?
Yeah. I even think Democrats will say border security. Yeah.
And we'll wrap up with this.
Sure.
I mean, so right now we have the I'd say very progressive members of our own, Massachusetts State House that want a sanctuary city bill, or to make Massachusetts a sanctuary state. Governor Baker's opposed to that. There are sanctuary cities. I mean, there are aspects of it
in our district, Lawrence.
Right.
Lawrence is one.
Okay. I mean, are you in favor of that, or do you just want the legality of it to change? Because right now, I mean, when somebody who is here illegally breaks the law, they're picked up by police. Whether it's for drunk driving or for another crime. Yeah. I mean, if they're here illegally, that's just the first time they're getting caught. So it is a public safety issue, and I think we don't have enough time to get into it. But I want to know what your stance on this is.
Sure.
If you'd agree with the executives of these various cities across the country that are implementing this, because there are trade-offs as to how effective this is in policing and keeping those communities safe. Because I think we can agree on that. We both want all these communities to stay safe.
Yes.
But doing that, taking that discretion out of the hands of our police officers, really lends itself to some problems and less safe communities and towns.
Yeah, I mean, look, this could be a different instance whether you're talking about one city versus the other. But generally speaking, I think this is essentially the order that Jeff Sessions issued down was a couple of weeks back, of which Lawrence is one of the targets of. To me, it takes the power out of the hands of mayors and police chiefs. To me, this is actually federal overreach. Again, I think you got. I'm actually a huge fan of mayors. Generally speaking, I am. No one knows their communities better, and I think we need to be trusting them more. And I believe, look, you got to be following the law.
So you have to. All right, but I was saying the law states that right now, if somebody's apprehended for committing a crime, they have to contact immigration authorities, and then if they are here illegally, then they are deported. So.
Well, that was Obama administration policy, which you're quoting as well, right?
Like I said, I've agreed with. I don't agree with everything.
Yeah.
Disagree with everything President Obama did.
You have got to live in a country with laws and rules.
Okay.
And is the truth. You have to. You have to enforce the laws. You have to enforce the rules. And I think the problem with our immigration policy broadly, you can't forget the values. The values are actually first and foremost. When I see families torn apart by ICE raids, we've all seen the videos from the airports. It's un-American to me. It's just not who we are. It's not who we have been. That being said, we need to define what our immigration, what the process is for immigration going forward. This can be a bipartisan approach. I think conservatives and liberals can come together on this issue. I truly do believe that.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that at all. Rufus Gifford.
Jeff, thank you.
He is a candidate for the United States Congress in Massachusetts 3rd District. The website is rufusgifford.com. I will include that on the show notes. It has been a pleasure speaking with you. I'm glad I try to end this with, I've had another congressional candidate. I guess he dropped out now.
Hope mine goes better than that.
Yeah, so we're setting precedent here. But my goal is to have as many of the candidates on as possible. I think when the audience sees this, you're not going to get this conversation really anywhere else. I don't think where you're challenged on policy, but you very clearly and were articulate in the way you presented it. Don't disagree. I don't agree with a fair chunk of it, but there was some agreement in between. And I think this is I'm the type of person you're going to see if you make it to the United States Congress, and you're going to have to work with. So at least there was some common ground on some issues, even though the major ones maybe we have disagreements. But the point is, I think no matter what, we have to continue a civil discourse about our policy, about our politics, the way we conduct ourselves. And I'm happy to invite you on my podcast so that we can move that forward and to a brighter tomorrow.
No, thank you, sir. And I appreciate this. This has been the most substantive conversation I've had with the media since we launched this campaign. So I appreciate that very, very much. And like you said, what's most important to me is that we can figure out this. Even if we're going to disagree on a lot, we can always find things to agree on. So I appreciate that.
Thank you, Rufus Gifford. If you'd like to subscribe to us on iTunes, subscribe to us on Google Play, subscribe to us on YouTube, share this with your friends on social media. We appreciate you listening. And until next time, have a good time or night. Thanks.